Imagine waking up one morning, right, and just realizing that the language you use to describe your own life, the history you were taught in school, and, I mean, the very way you understand reality itself were all carefully engineered by someone else.
Oh, man.
Right. And not just engineered by anyone, but by a system specifically designed to keep you subjugated. Like, you're walking around with a map of the world, but the map was drawn by the people who literally stole your house.
Yeah, it's a terrifying premise, because if the architecture of your mind has been designed by an opposing force, how do you even begin to think your way out of it?
Exactly.
You're essentially trying to pick a lock with a key they gave you, you know?
Exactly. And that is the exact premise we are plunging into today. Yeah. We are welcoming you into what I can only really describe as a deeply intense, highly structured blueprint for cultural survival.
Yeah, it really is a blueprint.
So whether you are, prepping for a seminar in sociology or trying to make sense of historical narratives, or you are just insanely curious about how societies are both dismantled and rebuilt, this deep dive is absolutely for you.
Definitely.
We are looking at a document that serves as a diagnostic tool for a wounded culture and, more importantly, a manual for its resurrection.
So the document we're looking at is dated July 14th, 2026. It is an essay titled Overcoming Destruction Through Faith, Memory, and Justice by JIMMA MAAT DOGON MCWILSON.
Right.
And McWilson identifies as a master's student in Kemetic Africology.
Now, before we start pulling this apart, we really need to establish some ground rules for how we are approaching this.
Yeah, that's crucial.
Because McWilson's text is a highly charged, provocative critique. I mean, he is taking direct aim at the historical mechanisms of capitalism, at imperialism, and its specific religious institutions.
Very direct aim.
Right. So as we navigate this, our goal today isn't to debate his politics or endorse this specific theology. We're taking a strictly neutral journalistic approach.
We're just the messengers here.
Exactly. We have to impartially map out the exact architecture of his argument, no matter how intense it gets, so that you can fully understand the framework he's constructed. We are just reading the architect's blueprints line by line.
And understanding those blueprints is vital because McWilson isn't just writing a historical complaint.
No, not at all.
Right. He is diagnosing the exact mechanisms of how a people are erased. He breaks down the anatomy of destruction into very specific phases, and then, and this is the key part, he provides a step-by-step regimen for reversing that destruction.
Yeah.
It's literally an instruction manual for reclaiming a stolen identity.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we even read the first sentence of his diagnosis, we have to talk about the visual anchor on the very first page.
Oh, the logo. Yes.
Because usually, when you read an academic paper, you get a sterile white page, black text, maybe a little university crest in the corner.
Right. Very standard.
But McWilson hits you with an explosion of color and symbolism before you even read a single word.
The visual element is impossible to ignore. I mean, it is doing as much heavy lifting as the text itself.
Let's paint a picture for your listening. The document opens with a massive logo for what is called AIEE, AWE, which stands for African World Exploratory University. And the background is pitch black. Popping out of that darkness are these enormous 3D letters in the classic Pan-African colors. So red, black, green, and yellow.
Right.
And inside the lettering itself, there are these intricate, geometric, almost woven patterns.
The woven aspect is so critical to understand here.
Yeah.
In many traditional African art forms and philosophies, weaving isn't just about making textiles. It's actually a metaphor for cosmology.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it represents the bringing together of disparate, fragmented threads to create something resilient and unified. So by filling the letters of the university with this woven pattern, McWilson is visually establishing his core thesis right out of the gate.
Before you even read the title.
Exactly. He is attempting to weave a fractured diaspora back together.
Right below that massive AW, there is a yellow oval, kind of like an official university seal. But the focal point, dead center inside that seal, is not a book or a Latin motto.
No, it's not.
It's an ankh, outlined in red, green, and yellow. And the ankh is the ancient Kemetic or Egyptian symbol of life. And hovering right above the title of the text is this phrase, quote, located in the essence of the divine.
When you synthesize those elements, the ankh symbolizing eternal life, the Pan-African colors representing a unified identity across the globe, the geometric patterns of traditional craftsmanship, and that phrase, located in the essence of the divine, you immediately realize this is operating outside the bounds of traditional Western academia.
Wait, I genuinely struggle with that.
How so?
Well, in traditional academia, if you submit a master's thesis or a scholarly critique with a brightly colored spiritual logo, and you literally declare your institution is located in the essence of the divine, you lose credibility.
In a Western context, yeah.
Right. You are supposed to be objective, secular. Doesn't this completely blur the line between scholarship and theology? How does McWilson justify this to a scholarly audience?
Well, in Western academic traditions, you are absolutely right. There is a strict clinical firewall between the scholar's mind and the scholar's spirit.
Always.
But look at his credentials again. Master student, Kemetic Africology. Kemetic Africology actively rejects that firewall.
Interesting.
Yeah, it looks back to ancient African intellectual traditions where science, history, philosophy, and theology were inextricably linked. They weren't separate departments. So to McWilson, separating the mind from the spirit isn't a badge of objectivity.
It's a symptom of the disease.
Exactly. For the author, that clinical separation is part of the very destruction he is writing about.
Wow.
You cannot write a survival guide for a people's spirit using the sterile, hyper-rational language of the forces that tried to break it.
That makes total sense.
Right. So the visual of the Ankh, the breath of life, stands in direct, defiant opposition to the forces of death he is about to outline. He is starting from a position of total spiritual sovereignty.
So he plants this flag of spiritual sovereignty, and then he immediately lists the forces trying to tear it down. The opening sentence of his critique is a rapid-fire list of absolute devastation.
It really is.
He calls out epistemicide, menticide, genocide, foreign domination, exploitative money interests, and savage military attacks.
It is a staggering sequence. And what we need to do is break down the specific anatomy of this destruction, starting with the very first one he names. Because it is arguably the most insidious, mostly because it is the most invisible.
Epistemicide.
Epistemicide.
Let's look at the root words here. Epistemology is the study of knowledge, right? How we know what we know. And the suffix side means the killing of. So epistemicide.
Right.
Let's define it exactly as the text does. McWilson writes that epistemicide is the destruction of a people's knowledge systems. He lists the specific targets, too. Languages, histories, spiritual traditions, healing practices, land wisdom, and ways of understanding the world.
The sheer scope of that list is what makes it so devastating. When we think of historical conquest, we usually think of stealing land or, extracting gold.
Right, physical things.
Exactly. But McWilson is pointing to the invisible infrastructure of a society. Epistemicide is the targeted assassination of the collective memory.
The text explains the exact mechanism for this, too. It says outside powers carry out epistemicide by declaring native ways inferior, primitive, or worthless, in order to replace living wisdom with imposed narratives.
Yes.
Let's bring this into a modern context for a second. Think of it like a catastrophic tech issue. It's like a hostile entity hacking into your computer.
Okay, I like this.
They don't just steal the physical laptop. They hack in and they wipe the hard drive entirely. They delete your family photos, your specific software, the unique operating system you built to run your life. Then they install a completely foreign operating system. And when your computer doesn't run their new software perfectly, they point to it and call your computer primitive.
Wow. And taking that tech analogy a step further, what happens when your operating system is replaced? You literally cannot process information the way you used to.
Yeah.
Your indigenous language, the foundational software code of your culture, is gone. And when you lose a language, you don't just lose words.
You lose meaning.
You lose the philosophical concepts embedded in that language. You lose the specific way your ancestors categorized the stars or human emotions or justice itself.
And McWilson specifically highlights the loss of healing practices and land wisdom. I want to pause on those two for a second because that takes it out of the abstract realm of philosophy and into raw physical survival.
It really does. Erasing land wisdom isn't just about insulting a community's heritage. If a culture loses its specific land wisdom, like how to farm their unique soil, how to read the local weather patterns, which indigenous plants are edible or medicinal, they can no longer feed themselves.
If you don't know how to farm your own land anymore, you have to buy food from the people who conquered you.
Precisely. You become entirely dependent on the foreign powers' agricultural systems, their supply chains, their economy.
Wow.
Epistemicide removes a community's physical ability to survive independently. It forces reliance on the very people who destroyed your knowledge in the first place. The destruction of knowledge essentially creates a captive consumer base.
That is incredibly dark. I mean, by convincing a people that their knowledge is worthless, you just trap them entirely.
Yes.
But hacking the culture's knowledge, the epistemicide, isn't enough to sustain an empire on its own, is it?
Yeah.
Because as long as the individuals actually remember they are being suppressed, they will eventually rebel.
Inevitably.
So the oppressor has to go deeper. They have to attack the individual mind itself. Which brings us to the next phase of McWilson's framework. Menticide.
So the text defines menticide as the attack on the mind and spirit. Notice the structural shift here. Epistemicide targets the collective, the library, the language, the agricultural traditions. Menticide targets the individual psychology. It is the psychological malware installed to destroy a person's sense of self-worth.
And the text gives us the specific tools used to deploy this malware. It works through fear, humiliation, propaganda, false education, and a phrase that really stuck with me: the constant pressure to accept the oppressor's version of reality.
Constant pressure is the defining characteristic here.
Yeah.
Menticide isn't a single battle or a horrific event that happens once and then you recover from it. It is an ambient environment. It is waking up every single day and interacting with legal systems, educational institutions, and media that continuously reinforce your inferiority.
Let's connect this to the listener's everyday life, just to ground it. Think about how modern algorithms or social media can create an ambient psychological pressure.
Oh, absolutely.
If your feed constantly shows you images of a specific beauty standard you don't fit or a lifestyle you can't afford, it slowly chips away at your self-worth.
Right.
Now, multiply that by 1,000. And imagine it's not just an algorithm on your phone, but the entire legal and educational framework of your society telling you that your ancestors contributed nothing to history, that your physical features are ugly, and that your natural instincts are dangerous.
The psychological toll of that is just unimaginable. The text states that the ultimate goal of menticide is to, quote, make people doubt themselves, reject their own identity, and believe that liberation is impossible.
That last part.
Yes, that is the masterstroke of menticide. Because if you believe liberation is impossible, the oppressor doesn't even need to use physical chains. You will police yourself.
You just give up.
You will teach your children to stay quiet and accept the imposed reality. It is learned helplessness on a civilizational scale.
But if the malware is that effective,
Right.
if the ambient pressure is that constant, how does anyone ever break out of it?
That's the big question.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and honestly, where I need you to clarify McWilson's logic for us. If the tools of menticide include false education and rewriting a person's entire reality, how does someone trapped inside that system even realize they are being lied to? Where does the text say the spark of mental recovery actually comes from?
This is a crucial question, and the answer brings us right back to the visual of the Ankh and the spiritual foundation of the text we discussed at the very beginning.
Right. Ankh.
The author does not say the spark of mental recovery comes from a new textbook or a political debate or a sudden realization of Marxist theory. McWilson points to a spiritual mechanism. He writes about the divine purpose placed within them.
Placed within them. So the recovery mechanism is entirely internal.
Yes, entirely. The text implies that the truth of human dignity cannot be permanently overwritten because it is literally woven into the human spirit by the divine creator.
Wow.
The oppressor can apply constant pressure. They can force you into false education, but eventually that internal divine spirit recognizes the profound dissonance of the imposed reality.
Okay, sticking with our tech analogy from earlier, even if the computer's hard drive is totally wiped and the new malware is running the system, there is a piece of code hardwired into the motherboard by the original manufacturer that simply cannot be overwritten.
That's the exact mechanism.
Yeah.
And once that hardwired code activates, once that internal realization happens, the mental recovery process begins. The text says, quote, but the mind can be renewed. The spirit can be strengthened. And it makes this definitive claim, quote, a people who recover confidence in their own worth can no longer be ruled by lies. The illusion shatters.
But just because the illusion shatters and you can no longer be ruled by lies doesn't mean you are suddenly free.
Unfortunately, no.
In fact, according to McWilson's framework, this is exactly when the physical violence escalates. Because if you can't control the mind with lies anymore, you have to control the body with force.
Exactly.
This brings us to the third phase of destruction. We've covered epistemicide and menticide. Now, the text outlines the physical toll, genocide, and military attacks.
The author calls this the most brutal phase of oppression. While the first two are cultural and psychological, this is the raw, kinetic manifestation of domination. It targets lives, families, lands, sacred places, and what the text specifically calls the continuity of a people.
I really want to focus on how this brutality is rationalized, because empires rarely just say, hey, we want your stuff, so we are going to kill you.
Right, they never say that.
They always wrap it in a moral justification. McWilson writes, such violence is often justified through lies that portray the victims as obstacles, savages, or threats. Obstacles, savages, threats.
Those three words are carrying immense historical weight in this essay.
They are words perfectly designed to excuse the perpetrator from guilt. Think about it. If I'm building a transcontinental railroad or establishing a global supply chain and a mountain is in my way, it's an obstacle. I dynamite it. I don't feel guilty about dynamiting a mountain.
No, it's just progress.
Right. And if I encounter a population I label as savages, well, that implies they are wild beasts that need to be tamed, meaning my violence is actually a civilizing favor to them.
It's for their own good.
Exactly. And if I label them a threat, well, then my violence is purely self-defense.
The text is demonstrating that physical violence never travels alone. It is always preceded and justified by menticide and propaganda. You must mentally and linguistically dehumanize a people before you can physically destroy them without moral collapse. And McWilson doesn't just leave this as an abstract concept of empire. He identifies the specific historical architects of this destruction. He outlines what we might call a trinity of domination.
Right. And again, a quick reminder for you listening. McWilson is taking a very firm, highly specific stance on the historical roles of certain institutions here. We are unpacking his exact critique to understand how this machine of domination operates in his worldview.
Right, we're mapping the blueprint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he names three specific forces that have historically worked in tandem: foreign missionaries, money men, and military powers.
This trinity is the engine of the destruction we've been discussing. McWilson argues they conquered territory, conscience, resources, and imagination. We really need to look at how these three interlock, because they are not separate historical phenomena in this text. They are a deeply coordinated strategy.
Let's build a new analogy to understand how they interlock. Let's think of this trinity as an aggressive, hostile real estate takeover.
Okay.
The military is the wrecking ball. The money men are the ruthless developers. And the foreign missionaries are the PR firm handing out glossy brochures to justify the demolition.
That works perfectly. Let's start with the PR firm, the foreign missionaries.
Okay.
The text says they came with scriptures while disrespecting the sacredness already present among the people.
So McWilson's view, the missionaries are the tip of the spear for epistemicide.
Exactly. Their specific job in this trinity is to conquer the conscience. By disrespecting the existing sacredness, they invalidate the indigenous spiritual connection to the land and to each other. They replace the local living wisdom with a foreign, hierarchical religious structure that demands obedience. They prime the population to accept outside authority as a moral imperative.
Then, once the spiritual tie to the land is broken, the developers move in. The money men. The text notes they came with contracts while draining wealth from the land.
These are the agents of capitalism and resource extraction. Once the missionaries have categorized the native beliefs as primitive, the land is no longer sacred. It is simply a commodity.
A resource.
Yes. The money men use the language of legality contracts to justify the theft of resources. They aren't stealing, they will argue. They are developing. They are instituting commerce.
But what happens when the people realize the contracts are rigged, or they simply refuse to abandon their sacred sites? That's when the developer calls in the wrecking ball. The military powers.
Yes.
The text says they came with weapons while calling destruction civilization.
The enforcers of imperialism. They conquer the physical territory, but crucially, the text says they also conquer the imagination.
Wait, how does a military conquer imagination?
By establishing the parameters of what is physically possible.
Oh.
Yeah. When you see a military force that possesses overwhelming technological violence, gunboats, artillery, drone strikes, it severely limits your ability to imagine a world where you can successfully resist them. It enforces the learned helplessness we discussed in menticide.
So, to summarize McWilson's trinity for a second. The military secures the physical land through violence and terror. The money men extract the material value through exploitative contracts. And the missionaries provide the moral justification, ensuring that the conquered people feel spiritually inferior while it all happens.
It's a closed loop of total domination.
The military says we have to do this for security. The money men say we have to do this for economic progress. The missionaries say we have to do this to save their souls.
The result, according to the text, is the complete systemic drain of wealth, culture, and life. It is the total package of epistemicide, menticide, and genocide.
When you lay it out like that, with the malware, the ambient pressure, the trinity of domination, it just feels insurmountable. It feels like the machine is too big to break.
It does.
But the entire purpose of this document is that the machine can be broken. McWilson insists this closed loop is not impenetrable. He writes, "True justice requires naming these wrongs clearly, without fear, and refusing to confuse domination with destiny."
Refusing to confuse domination with destiny. That might be the most powerful phrase in the entire text.
It really is. It's a profound paradigm shift. It means just because you are currently oppressed, just because your land was stolen and your language was erased, does not mean the universe intended for you to be oppressed forever.
Right.
Just because they won the battle and hold the power right now doesn't mean they own the timeline.
And that brings us to how the author structures time itself. To overcome this massive destruction, McWilson provides a distinct temporal framework. He maps out a timeline that connects the trauma of the past directly to the liberation of the future.
Let's construct that timeline based on his exact narrative flow.
Oh.
Let's start with the past.
Okay.
In McWilson's framework, the past is characterized by immense pain, the loss of knowledge, the epistemicide, the blood of the innocent. But it is fundamentally anchored by something positive, what was handed down by the ancestors.
The past, in this view, is a repository. It holds both the deep trauma of the mysides and the profound living wisdom of the ancestors. It is the soil from which any future recovery has to grow. You cannot bypass the past.
Then we move to the present.
Right. The present is defined by historical resistance strategies. It is the active state of refusing to confuse domination with destiny. In the present tense, the author says resistance is realizing that no empire can permanently bury the truth. The present is the active, ongoing process of exposing what the trinity of domination tries to hide.
Because, as the text notes, the blood of the innocent cries out. That is a very evocative spiritual phrase.
It is.
It implies that the present cannot remain a state of peace as long as the injustices of the past remain unresolved. The present is a state of active, uncomfortable reckoning.
And that active reckoning leads us to the future. The future, in this timeline, is liberation. But I love how practical he makes this. The text says the future involves reclaiming knowledge not as a relic of the past, but as a living foundation for the future.
That distinction is paramount if we're to understand Kemetic Africology. Think about a relic. A relic is an artifact you put in a museum. You put it behind glass, you walk past it, you sigh nostalgically about the way things used to be, and then you go back to your modern life.
A living foundation, on the other hand, is what you build a house on.
Exactly. The future liberation McWilson envisions is not about returning to the past to cosplay as ancient Egyptians.
No.
It requires taking the ancient wisdom, the land wisdom, the healing practices, the spiritual sovereignty, and using them as the literal, functional building blocks for a new, modern society.
So what does this all mean? It means McWilson isn't just looking backward to mourn. He isn't just writing a eulogy for a broken culture.
Right.
He is mapping out a timeline where historical survival is the literal fuel for future liberation. You survive the trauma of the past, so you can actively resist the propaganda in the present, so you can build a living foundation in the future.
What's fascinating here is the absolute certainty embedded in this timeline. The text asserts that no weapon can make injustice righteous. To McWilson, the timeline arcs inevitably toward justice.
Inevitably.
Why? Because, again, we return to the divine. The divine creator acts as the highest judge. Human empires rise and fall. They use their weapons and their contracts and their PR firms, but they cannot alter the fundamental cosmic law of justice.
But he doesn't just say, sit back and wait for divine justice. He doesn't say the universe will fix it, so just meditate.
No, not at all.
A timeline is just a concept until it is acted upon. And this is where the text transitions from a philosophical diagnosis into a gritty, daily survival guide. We move into the very specific, practical steps the text demands for restoration.
This is the cure. We've spent all this time on the disease. Now we look at the steps for restoration. The text explicitly states that the path forward must be guided by wisdom, discipline, unity, and spiritual strength. It requires massive coordinated action.
Let's list the author's explicit steps for restoration, and let's actually unpack how they combat the forces we just talked about. He gives us 5 key requirements: education, cultural renewal, moral courage, organized action, and faith.
Let's dissect the mechanisms here. Education is the direct structural antidote to the false education of menticide. You have to build your own schools and curriculums to overwrite the malware.
Right.
Cultural renewal is the antidote to epistemicide. It's reviving the language and the healing practices. Organized action is how you physically combat the military and the moneymen. I mean, you cannot fight a coordinated trinity of domination with scattered individuals.
But let's look at moral courage for a second. Why does it take moral courage to seek restoration?
Because, as he said earlier, you have to name the wrongs clearly, without fear. Think about the ambient pressure we discussed. When you are facing down the military wrecking ball, the wealthy developers and the institutional missionaries, speaking the truth makes you a target.
It really does.
It requires immense moral courage to stand up in a society that has normalized your subjugation and say, this is a lie.
And that moral courage ties directly into how the text defines justice. And I really want to stop the tape here because this might be the biggest aha moment of the entire deep dive.
Oh, absolutely.
In a text that aggressively calls out genocide, exploitation, and brutal physical oppression, you might expect the conclusion to be a call for violent vengeance. But McWilson explicitly writes, justice is not achieved through hatred. It is achieved through truth, accountability, repair, and the restoration of what was stolen or suppressed.
It is a massive, counterintuitive insight.
Why reject hatred, though? If someone wiped out your history and stole your land, hatred feels like the most natural, justifiable response in the world.
Because if we connect this to the bigger picture of the text's spiritual foundation, hatred is actually just a continuation of menticide.
Wow. Hatred is a continuation of menticide. Explain that.
Well, what is menticide? It's the oppressor controlling your mind. If your entire existence is driven by hatred for the oppressor, your mind is still completely centered on the oppressor.
Oh, I see.
You are still letting them dictate your emotional and psychological reality. You are reacting to them rather than building for yourself. Justice, in McWilson's framework, is about repairing the victim, not just destroying the victimizer. It's about accountability, yes, but ultimately about restoring the living foundation.
You don't fix your hacked computer by going to the hacker's house and smashing their computer.
No.
You fix it by painstakingly reinstalling your own software.
Exactly.
And how do you do that? The text doesn't leave us hanging. It gives us very specific daily ancestral practices. It uses 5 distinct verbs to describe how people must resist these massive systemic sides on a daily, granular level.
These 5 verbs are the operational core of the survival guide.
The verbs are remember, teach, document, speak, honor. Let's dig into what each of these means practically for a person living inside this struggle. Let's start with remember.
Remembering is the foundational act of mental recovery. When the oppressor's propaganda is broadcasting 24/7 that you have no history, that you are a savage or an obstacle, simply remembering who you are is a revolutionary act.
It is.
It is the quiet internal rejection of the lie. It is the activation of that divine code on the motherboard.
And then teach. Remembering is internal, but teaching makes it communal. You can't just hold the memory in your own head. You have to pass it to the next generation. This is the education component. It's telling your children the truth before the school system has a chance to tell them the lie.
Then we have document. This is preserving history against erasure. If epistemicide works by destroying libraries and silencing oral histories, then writing things down, recording them, creating an archive that is building an impenetrable fortress around your knowledge.
Let's bring this down to earth for the listener. Documenting doesn't just mean writing a massive academic thesis like McWilson is doing. For the average person, documenting is a daily practice. It could be recording a voice memo of your grandmother telling a story about the neighborhood she grew up in before it was gentrified. It could be writing down an herbal remedy that has been in your family for generations. It is the active refusal to let the details of your existence fade into the ambient noise.
What about speak?
Speaking is vocalizing truth against propaganda. It is the outward manifestation of the moral courage we talked about. When the oppressor labels your people as threats, speaking means standing up in the public square, in the boardroom, in the classroom, and rejecting those labels.
Yeah.
It means defining your own self-worth out loud, using your own vocabulary.
And finally, honor. The text says to honor what was handed down by the ancestors.
Honoring is a distinct action from just remembering or teaching. To honor something is to treat it with reverence. It means you don't just know your history as a set of trivia facts, you respect it enough to let it guide your present actions.
Yeah.
It brings us back to the idea of a living foundation. You honor a foundation not by looking at it, but by building the house upon it.
Remember, teach, document, speak, honor. If you practice those 5 verbs daily, you are actively neutralizing the epitemicide and the menticide. You are keeping the culture alive at the molecular level, even when the macroeconomic structures are totally against you.
And this raises an important point about the nature of this struggle. McWilson is not selling a quick fix here. In the final paragraph, he acknowledges the brutal reality. Quote, "The struggle may be long and the wounds may be deep." Reversing centuries of coordinated destruction by the trinity of domination is generational work.
But the text is ultimately profoundly optimistic. The final sentences are a crescendo of resilience. He writes, "In the end, lies cannot overcome truth, violence cannot erase the soul, and greed cannot defeat divine justice."
It is a definitive reassertion of the spiritual laws of the universe, as seen through the lens of Kemetic Africology. Think about the tools of the oppressor: greed, violence, and lies. Those are finite resources. They eventually burn themselves out or consume themselves. But truth, the soul, and divine justice are infinite.
And he ends with a powerful summary of the tools needed for this long struggle. He says we move forward with memory as a guide, faith as a shield, knowledge as a weapon of liberation, and the divine creator as the highest judge. Memory, faith, and knowledge. Not tanks, not exploitative contracts, not PR campaigns.
It is a complete inversion of the oppressor's toolkit. The oppressor used weapons, propaganda, and greed. The oppressed will dismantle that system using memory, faith, and knowledge.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. We have gone on an intense, intricate journey today, unpacking JIMMA MAAT DOGON McWilson's 2026 text. We started by looking at the visual anchor, the AWE logo, the Pan-African colors, and the Ankh, which situated us not in sterile academia, but in a profoundly spiritual framework where the mind and spirit are linked.
From there, we explored his intense diagnosis of systemic destruction. We looked at epistemicide, the targeted destruction of a people's knowledge systems, their languages, and their living wisdom. We examined menticide, the psychological malware and ambient pressure designed to make a people reject their own identity.
And we looked at the physical brutality of genocide, driven by a historical trinity of domination: foreign missionaries conquering the conscience, money men extracting the resources, and military powers enforcing the theft.
But importantly, we spent just as much time mapping out his highly structured pathway to restoration. We constructed a timeline where past trauma informs present resistance to build a future living foundation. And we identified the daily practices required: remembering, teaching, documenting, speaking, and honoring.
All leading to a definition of justice that radically rejects hatred in favor of truth, accountability, and the restoration of what was stolen. It is an incredibly dense, provocative framework. And again, I want to thank you, the listener, for exploring this challenging text with us today. Engaging with strong, multifaceted, even controversial perspectives is absolutely the best way to understand the architecture of historical and cultural arguments.
Absolutely.
We didn't take sides, but hopefully we gave you the tools to understand how this specific worldview is constructed, brick by brick.
It is a worldview that demands active engagement, not just passive observation.
Which brings us back to where we started.
Yeah.
We said at the beginning that this text is a survival guide for a wounded culture. It illuminates exactly where the fractures are in the language, in the mind, in the land, and it provides the exact daily regimen to heal those fractures.
It does. And if we take his methodology seriously, it leaves us with a profound personal challenge. The text states that oppressors use false education and the erasure of history as a weapon of destruction. But McWilson flips that entirely. He positions memory as a weapon of liberation.
Memory as a weapon.
Yes. So, the question I want to leave you with, the thought to mull over long after this deep dive ends, is this. If memory truly is a weapon of liberation, what is one piece of your own personal or ancestral history that you haven't documented yet? What living wisdom are you carrying right now that needs to be spoken before it's forgotten?